Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome. Happy Friday, everybody, to the Rant. It is December 10th, 2021. And we're a couple weeks away from Christmas and like a week or so into the CBA lockout. All is good. There's not a lot going on, but there are a couple rumors kind of floating around that it's like everybody's got to get paid, right? So it's like I just kind of wonder if you had written about Kris Bryant and Kyle Schwarber, which we can cover separately or together, but these rumors about the Cubs' interest in Kris Bryant and Kyle Schwarber, and I guess to a certain degree you could say the Cubs are interested in every major league free agent. So I mean, I suppose you could throw that out there, but what do you make of things like this when you see them?
I generally make of it, and I don't want to cast aspersions on any individual, but I know some people obviously in different positions. Like we get a nice bump from having rumors or whatever, but like that's not our brand. Like breaking MLB news or so and so is interested, but I think people who are in that milieu, if you will, this is a tough time because there's literally nothing that can happen, right? There are no. I mean, are people back channeling different conversations? Probably, but I think those people who cover that stuff as kind of that is, and I don't want to call it a shtick because that makes it sound like it's not legitimate for some of them, although again I have my doubts.
Well, you could argue,
but yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think there's stuff. It's like in the report, and again, I mean, I wrote about it and it's out there. So it's Robert Murray, who's I think with Fansided now, and he's been in a couple different roles in the past. It was kind of like had heard from someone. I think the exact quote was, "Who would know Chicago?" And I'm like,
yeah, that's weird.
All right, what did that narrows it down to literally like 20 million people who live there, have lived there, visit there frequently. I mean, does that mean it's someone with the Cubs? Does that mean it's someone in Bryant's camp? Whatever. But that the Cubs well, of course the Cubs would be interested. I mean, they drafted him. He spent, 7 years there. Plus his minor league time in the organization. He's versatile. They need to fill a few spots. But listen, when it comes down to it, if the Cubs are going to do a long-term deal, it's going to have to be with Carlos Correa at this point, right? Like that's, I guess you could argue.
Yeah, it wouldn't like doing a long-term deal with Kris Bryant I don't think would make sense because Correa's 3 years younger,
right?
And it's kind of like a been there, done that type of thing with KB. It's not that I don't think we love him or anything. I kind of feel like we got the best years of Kris Bryant. I don't think he's going to be better than he was with the Cubs, even though he battled some injuries, and maybe he could be, but hard to imagine.
But here's the thing, right? It doesn't make sense for either team. The Cubs want to do shorter deals. Kris Bryant is 30 years old. He doesn't want to do like a 2 or 3 year deal. It's not quite the same as Marcus Stroman doing it, getting a 2-year opt-out, unless. So here's the thing: you keep tabs on someone. If Bryant's market doesn't solidify for whatever reason, right? Things don't come around and they do some kind of a deal where they like a Stroman type deal where they could say, hey, 2 years at $28 million a piece. I'm just throwing numbers out there. This is not like there's zero basis. 25 million. Let's say 25. 2-year, $50 million deal like what Justin Verlander did. And you'll get an opt-out after each of the first two. But here's the thing. Bryant doesn't want to just bounce in and bounce back out somewhere else. He wants a place that he can call home for a while, not get, not have a possibility of getting traded or whatever. And I just don't think that what he wants and what the Cubs want or need to do are going to match up. Now, if things totally don't materialize anywhere else and he's like, hey, you know what? I'm already familiar with it. I got a place there. I know what's up. Or maybe he already sold his place there. I don't know. But yeah, okay, I can make that work because it's very little acclimation and the summers in Chicago are awesome. And then I can do that, but I know for sure after 2 years I'm gone and I can move somewhere else. I just don't think it makes sense. So yeah, do they have interest? Of course they do. But here's the thing. Who does it makes more sense for the Cubs to let people know, or for the Cubs to let someone else let people know that they have interest, because it's good for fan service. It's good to know that they're considering. Of course, they're considering. Oh, they're interested in Bryant. Yeah, okay, but are you really? Like, I don't buy it. I don't think there's any
enough to sign a 7-year deal. I think
No.
would be the real question.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any way. I mean, as you mentioned, Carlos Correa, he's the best free agent out there, offensively, and definitely would make the most sense for a longer term deal because he's a younger guy. I mean,
and he plays a position they absolutely need. Yeah, he is
Yeah.
3 years younger. I mean, that's here's what I'm saying. And this has nothing to do. Like, I would love for nothing else than for Kris Bryant to come back and be in Chicago. I wish he had never left. I wish they'd extended him. I wanted to see that happen. I just think the way they position them. So the other issue with this whole thing, and Correa is not left-handed, so that's part of the issue, is that, like, they need left-handed power in the worst way right now. Like, they just keep getting dudes who bat right-handed. I mean, that's part of the reason why I really loved the concept of a trade with the Reds that would bring Mike Moustakas. And a lot of people are like, oh, that guy sucks. Like, you gotta, like, let's apply context to this whole thing and then look at it. You're like, oh yeah, I think that actually makes sense. But that's just me being a dumb blogger, right? So, but yeah, like I said, I think the biggest stumbling block is the Cubs would love him back if it was a really short-term deal, even at very high AAV. Say, hey, we'll give you $60 million a year for 3 years. Obviously, that's not going to happen, right? But anybody would do that because you're making $180 million for 3 years. Who gives a shit what happens after that? But I do think that KB wants a place that he knows he can call home for most of, if not the remainder of his career, and just keep that simple for his family and himself and everything else, and just have that security. So I just don't think that's happening.
And on the other side of it, I mean, you mentioned the Cubs need the left-handed power. And certainly Kyle Schwarber, that kind of rumor kicked up this week as well, that, the Cubs may be interested in him. And there were rumors out there that said that he was seeking a 3-year, $60 million deal, which would give him a $20 million AAV, something he's never going to get in a long-term deal. And so it kind of makes you feel like that could be a lot more realistic for the Cubs to do something like that, because even though, $20 million a year for a player like Kyle Schwarber would have seemed unfathomable, clearly, for the Cubs before last year.
They didn't want to pay him 1/6 of that.
Yeah. But when you look at their need for left-handed power, when you look at what Schwarber did, and assuming that he could come back to the Cubs and not revert to kind of, where he was struggling previously with the Cubs, and be that type of player again, if he could be the player he was last year, that's a guy the Cubs really need. And for 3 years, $60 million, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and that's what's funny is, like, you think about it. Think if they had approached Kyle Schwarber pre-2020 and said, "Hey, we'll give you, $45 million for 4 years, $48 million," right? He probably jumps at that. I mean, maybe not, because he was due $10 million, and maybe he, in arbitration, maybe he figured, so that way you're talking about, but you're talking, hey, 3 years, $38 million. That is something I'm sure he would consider. But now he's obviously done really well for himself in regards to that. And so if the Cubs were going to do it, but yeah, like you said, hey, they need left-handed power. He could, if you needed him to. We saw him play first base with the Red Sox. Frank Schwindel, right-handed batter, Kyle Schwarber, left-handed batter. The DH is almost certainly going to be part of this new CBA, one way or the other. I know the players, I think, want to be coy about that, right? They don't want to just be like, yeah, we want the DH.
Yeah, not giving anything away.
Right, but it obviously makes a lot more sense, because guess what? That's more jobs, right? At the end of the day. And so that will extend, not only does it improve his value to all 30 teams, but it extends his playing career. And so, I mean, look at a guy like Nelson Cruz, right? I'm not saying Kyle Schwarber's the same thing. He's going to be dropping bombs till he's like 45 years old, but that allows him in that position to be able to kind of, he doesn't need the 10-year deal, right? He can string that along, because if he can parlay a few power seasons, because that's really his calling card, the outfield stuff doesn't matter as much. And I think that is the kind of spot, like we said, the Cubs have so few long-term commitments that even paying $20 million a year for a guy who's relatively one-dimensional is by far the worst thing they could do. Whether or not they go, I mean, if they don't go after somebody huge like Correa, they could easily absorb $20 million, and they still got tons of room left. So you get a guy like that who can kind of play a few things over. Not to mention the fact that most of the damage he did when he went on that tear and he hit something like 14 homers in 12 games. It was some wild. He was doing that out of the leadoff spot in Washington, right? Now, the Cubs weren't able to get that same production. Do they figure they can get that again? I mean, now all of a sudden, if you have that kind of thunder and that kind of on base out of your leadoff spot, well, you know, that masks a whole lot. I think we've talked about that. I wrote about this when they first got to Kyle Schwarber talk about being a leadoff hitter under Madden. If you hit a leadoff homer in the top of an inning, you have like an over 60% chance to win that game. I mean, when you look at the win expectancy, right? I think it's actually closer to 70. It might even be 69%, which is nice. And then I think it's something closer to like 56 to 60% if you do that in the bottom of the inning, or I'm sorry, vice versa. It's a little bit lower in the top because, you know, then you got the chance at the bottom. But it's like 50 something and then 60 something, whatever it is. It's a really good chance if you score first.
You're improving your odds,
right? So, and he draws walks, and he improved his overall plate approach with the right selective aggressiveness that I've been really asking for. I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense. Again, I think that ship has probably sailed, but it is one of those where, gosh, he checks a lot of boxes, and I just think it would be hilarious to see them pass on him at $10 million, only to then go back and pick him up for $60 million over 3 years. That would just be fun. I think. Somebody look at it like, what the hell were you guys doing? You know, but
I mean, if you look at it independently, you know, as if he wasn't a member of the Cubs before, and you forget about the history, he does make sense for the Cubs. There's not a lot of people who fit the role as fit the needs of what the Cubs have currently, as well as Kyle Schwarber does. And if you're talking about a guy who's looking for a short-term deal, which brings me to my next point, which is, did Marcus Stroman and his deal, which was very largely unexpected at the 3 years with $71 million, did he reset things in terms of, you know, it seems like these guys, the kind of calling card is always like, let's get as many years as we can with as high an AAV as possible, but first as many years as we can. And I think Stroman has taken a different approach. And I think Kyle Schwarber is taking that same approach, where these guys are saying, you know, we can get a higher AAV possibly for over the same term. We just have to perform, but it's not going to be guaranteed right up front. And so it's a little bit more of a risk for the players, but they're starting out with higher AAVs in these long-term deals. And I think that's kind of a smart move for some of these guys. It's definitely going to work out for some of them. Is this a new trend that we're going to see? I mean, maybe not from the superstars, right? You're going to have like the Kris Bryants, you know, wanting longer term deals, Bryce Harper's, things like that. But these kind of like fringe superstar players, are some of them going to start coming around to higher AAV, shorter term deals?
You know, I think, and as much as I hate to reference this individual because he's just a terrible person with or without the allegations that have been leveled against him, but Trevor Bauer did a huge deal like that, right, prior to being placed on administrative leave in the wake of some really awful stuff that may have happened there. That he actually hasn't really disputed happened. So the allegation stuff. Anyway, but we saw Max Scherzer do something similar. However, it's a little bit different, and I think that's where it's important to look at these things, like where Stroman is a little bit of a different case, and Eno Saris, who's former guest. That was a super fun guest, actually, because I think we had him on for one of our Friday happy hours when we used to drink during the show. Long time ago. We were much younger then. But he wrote about, like Stroman versus Gossman versus Ray. And interesting, I didn't realize that Stroman and Gossman have the same agent, speaking of which. And so that's kind of interesting. but that Stroman projects as someone who's going to age much better than the other two. And I think that's part of it, is that he's never been a guy who relies on high velocity, right? So you can maintain that 92, 93-ish, maybe a little bit better. And some of the improvements that he's made in terms of his repertoire and some of the things that he does are more conducive. And so he can maybe parlay a shorter deal right now into another longer deal. We talked about that, whether he opts out after 2 years or not. Same thing with Schwarber, as I mentioned earlier, the way his skill set works out and the fact that we're probably going to have a DH across the entire league means that, again, he's a little bit more marketable longer term, because he's not, whereas someone like Kris Bryant, they're going to look at and say, well, it's his versatility, it's his base running and his speed. So they're looking at more of how will that athleticism age, and typically that's not going to go quite as well as if you're a little bit more one-dimensional, or if you are a pitcher who doesn't rely on velocity versus, although look at Justin Verlander, he got, maybe if he ever signs it, 2 years and $50 million, and is a dude who's still throwing upper 90s, into his late 30s. So I do think it's more situational, but at the same time, I think where they're looking for is, how can we game this system a little bit and say, well, do I want the longer term deal at a lower AAV, or do I want to go high for short and hope I can flip that or parlay that, I should say, into another deal that's going to carry me just as far. So again, using Stroman as that example, I think I probably talked about this, so I apologize if I'm being redundant. In relation to Gausman and Ray, is that he may be able to end up getting more money than either of them did over a longer period of time between this contract and his next one. And I think that's probably what he and his agent were looking at. In addition to being like, it seems like he really wants to pitch in Chicago, so he can be like, well, I'll have my cake and eat it too. But yeah, I think guys are looking at this and saying, where can we leverage? If you look at a team like the Cubs that has said flat out, we'd rather do shorter deals for higher money per year. Well, hell, let's go. Let's take advantage of that. Let's make that work. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a guy, for just using Schwarber, continuing to use him as an example, who's, the reality of him getting a 5+ year deal at a $20 million AAV is probably not, it doesn't really exist. I wouldn't think it would. You'd see him probably, I would think, coming in maybe closer to $15 million on a longer term deal. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably fits. I don't have any reason to disagree with you on that one.
Yeah. So that's where I think it's a little smarter for these guys. And I think it also works out for teams like the Cubs, to be honest with you. And now would be a great time for players to want to start doing this.
Yeah.
When the Cubs are pretty stocked, in their minor league system. They've got a lot of really good young guys who just need some time to develop. They sure could use some highly skilled veterans to come in and kind of, drive them over the next 2 to 3 years, so they're just not a cellar dweller. Of course, it's going to be hard to do with Cincinnati and Pittsburgh in the division, but you can avoid that if you get guys who are coming in who are willing to sign shorter term deals for these higher AAV numbers. And if that happens and you get that happening more and more, it will be very interesting, because at that point the Cubs will pay, right? And there's no reason for the Cubs to avoid a 2 to 3 year contract with a higher AAV at this point. They have so much room. And so it's ridiculous to think that they wouldn't be going after these guys if they could get them on shorter term deals. And if they can, then suddenly, the Cubs could really be vying for the division. And I think there's a formula that makes that pretty feasible. Yeah.
Well, and so, along those lines, and I brought this up just a bit ago, but think about the flip side of that. And this is something that we had talked about in regards to the Padres, and whether that be Will Myers, Eric Hosmer, somebody like that, who's making more money than really what their production has been worth of late. You got a team like the Padres that really wants to go for it, that probably wants to clear some salary off the books in order to maybe upgrade at those positions. So the thought initially had been, well, hey, maybe the Cubs go and get a guy like that and they buy prospects. But another, and this came from Tommy Myers, who's at Full Count Tommy on Twitter. He's friend of mine. I've known this guy for years, and he's got some really good thoughts. And I like to poke fun at him a lot, and it's like a lot of times I'll find myself kind of vibing with the thoughts that he's got. And one in particular, because I thought, hey, the Cubs need a guy they need a hard thrower in that rotation, right? The one thing, and this is what I talked about with Stroman, that worried me a little bit was he's not only is he not, it's not that he's not a hard thrower, because he's not, but he generates a ton of ground balls, right? They need a guy who can miss some bats, who's got a little bit of a different profile from what they have. Well, what if you were able to pick a guy like that up? Frankie Montas from the A's, like that's a possibility, but like 2 years of control left, dude throws like 97, 98. It's going to cost a lot to pry him loose from Oakland, right? Because they don't have any more bad contracts, really. They're looking to get rid of good contracts for good players. But what if you look in Cincinnati and you say, well, Tyler Mahle, that dude throws mid-90s, good slider, misses a bunch of bats. But boy, that would take a lot because he's 27 years old, still 2 years of control. But wait, what if the Cubs were willing to take on Mike Moustakas and his $16 million a year for a dude who just hit something like 208, was negative WAR. He was hurt a lot, right? Plantar fasciitis, which will screw you up bad. I've like just now finally done with it after like 2 years, right? That is,
dude, I have plantar fasciitis. I've never had it in my
horrible.
whole life.
It's horrible.
But I can run with it.
Yeah, but it's like you got it. Mine was like really bad. Like it was debilitating for a while. Thankfully but anyway, so you look at Moustakas. So left-handed bat, plays the corners. He's played a lot of second base. Milwaukee moved him there, and that's kind of where he's been. But guess what? The Cubs have two guys at the corners who are both right-handed hitters. Boy, it'd be nice to have a lefty who could play in there from time to time. Outside of this last year, I think he hit 8 homers in 2020, which is actually a pretty good ISO when you consider the short season. But prior to that, I think he was like 38, 28, 35 homers, something like that with Milwaukee. Okay, $16 million. We just talked about $20 million for Schwarber. What if you get a left-handed slugger like that who, okay, the health isn't great, but you don't need him to play every day. Not only do you probably have a DH, you can move him in and out of 3 different spots in the infield if you want, and you're getting a guy for the rotation who also is only under control for 2 years. Now you're talking about short term. You're talking Mally's probably going to make about $5-6 million this next season. Maybe 8 to 10 the season after. So at most, you're talking about adding something like $22 million this year, maybe 25 the next between two players, and you're probably not going to give up a bunch of prospects to get Mahle. Probably just some fringe guys because you're taking on the contract. Like that to me is a move that makes a ton of sense, doesn't cost much money, fills positions of need. Now, will the Reds be willing to do something like that? Maybe not, because if you're not actually improving much in addition to getting rid of the money, particularly when you're doing that in the division. But boy, so that's the kind of move, though, that I look at. I'm like, I would love that. Because, you're the starting pitcher, check. High velocity, check. Misses bats, check. Corner infielder, check. Left-handed bat, check. Short-term commitments, check. Like, what's the down? And the downside, as people on Facebook will tell you, is that Moustakas sucks. Oh, like that's the big one. Like, that's like the least. You're not picking this guy up because you're thinking, oh, this is going to be our number 3 hitter for the next 2 years, and we hope he gets better in MASH. It's like, no, that and $16 million for a bench bat, huh? Like, okay, like I'm not trying to. It's just so funny. It's the same thing as like I wrote about Ian Happ and what he said about the CBA stuff. And it was like, you suck. You're not even worth $100,000. You shouldn't even be in baseball. Like, all right. These are the people that we're dealing with, right? Like that's some of the dumbest stuff that could possibly be said. But that's the kind of deal I would like to see them do. Use that money. If you've got it, go use it. And it's clear right now, there's not a lot of guys that are available. And the part of the reason I say that too is because Danny Duffy, right? Flexor tendon surgery, probably done until June. And when he does come back, he's going to be a reliever. Well, the Cubs don't need that. I was looking at Duffy, and Patrick Mooney even wrote that. That's a guy the Cubs would pursue. after the line, and this is, of course, before we knew that this all happened with the surgery. I mean, he didn't even pitch after getting traded. Was it to L.A.? So something had to be wrong. But that was a guy who you look at, okay, hard thrower, short-term commitment, cool, and that's gone. Kikuchi, you say Kikuchi is still left out there. Kikuchi.
That's a great name.
Yeah.
That's a jersey I'd buy.
Kikuchi. Because it's fun to say. And Carlos Rodon, if again, I think he wants more over. I mean, he probably doesn't want to just do 1 or 2 years. I'm sure he wants some security. That's still possible. But it's the pool of guys who fit what the Cubs said they needed and have yet to even meaningfully pursue in any sense is very, very shallow at this point. There's not a lot of hard throwing pitchers that are out there that you can just go pick up. So you might have to get creative with that. And, hey, if they can do it and they can pick up, and it doesn't have to be the same move, but gosh, there are starting pitcher, left-handed power, little help on the corners, need a shortstop badly, which is where Seager would have made some sense as a left-handed, really great hit tool, but obviously that's off the board, as unlikely as that may have been in the first place. So I just want to see them. We've seen they can be smart, and we've seen that they are willing to spend a little bit of money. Now it comes down to what can you make work in a very limited period of time from the point the lockout ends, and maybe that gets going. Maybe that's something where in that short window, those players who are left are like, shit, I got to get something done, and we may see more short-term deals.
That's what I'm wondering,
because
does that happen?
Yeah, because
is that something
Correa
that the
story,
is that something that the owners are trying to force? I mean, you had mentioned that, the owners may just be looking to shorten the free agency windows to a certain extent, or the signing window, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, if that forces players to sign more quickly to get in with a team, to start the season, and that also drives up AAV, that kind of might be doing the opposite of what the owners would hope, right? I mean,
maybe I think at the end of the day, what they're looking at is, unless this guy's in the middle now, the middle right now, because if you look at it, average salaries have been stagnant since 2015. There's been no meaningful difference. And actually the median salary has come down significantly in that time, from 1.65 million to 1.15 million. So I think that's where we got to look at. Right. So that's what everybody will see Max Scherzer and be like, oh, it's out of control. $130 million for 3 years. Yeah, but guess what? Now, might that adjust the average for next year? And yeah, maybe a little bit. But what we said was going to happen, and exactly what we said owners were going to point to with the $1.7 billion spent on free agents in November, and it's the most ever. Well, yeah, no shit, because it's the first time you've locked them out since 1990. Everybody knew there was going to be a lockout on December 1st. So they had to sign. Like, this is what the owners wanted. So if it's something that the owners wanted, I think we need to consider that it's probably not a good thing for the players, or at least the owners don't want it to be. So when you look at that, when you say the average contract for a Major League Baseball player has gone up 21% in the last decade. 21%. Average contracts in the NFL and NBA have gone up about 50% in that time. So they're well below that. At the same time, and somebody mansplained to me how franchise values can't directly correlate. Like, again, no shit. But the Cubs were worth, heading into the 2012 season, the Cubs were worth $867 million as a franchise. Now they're worth like $3.5 billion. They've gone up 4 times in value, while contracts have gone up 21%. So I get it, right?
And that's through a pandemic too.
Right. That's they went up 5% during a season in which they said they experienced biblical losses. Now, I love when people mansplain to me that those aren't directly correlative. Okay, great. I understand that. But if I'm looking at it saying, well, housing rates are going up and my housing values have quadrupled in the last 10 years, but I'm making about the same amount of money as what I was, well, then how the hell am I paying for my house? Right? Like there's different things that go into, like, things should all kind of go up on the same scale. And so if value is increasing, but the payroll is not increasing very much, well, what does that tell you? It means that owners stand to make a lot more. That doesn't necessarily mean owners, I'm not trying to indicate that owners are pocketing more money, although we don't really know that because we can't see their books. But the point is that's what players are trying to get out of this. And I think the owners are looking at it and saying they also want to create this frenzy, because the thing that it does is, for one, it creates a smokescreen, because the players to whom $1.7 billion were given are largely guys at the very top of that pile, right? But 35% of Major League ball players last year, 35% made under $600,000. So we're talking, that's the league minimum, 35% of them. And only, I think, 17 players were making more than 26 million. So now you've got whatever that percentage is, like 1% making 26 million, 35% making under 6. So the low end of that is always going to subsidize the high end. And then you've got the guys in the middle. Well, that's, I think, what Major League Baseball is dependent upon, is saying, if we can squeeze the guys in the middle and rely upon the ones at the very bottom to subsidize it, then who gives a shit if we're paying a few of these guys $300 million? Great. That's the such a minority that it doesn't matter. And I
well,
think
but the thing that they
hype.
do is with the help of the press, and these larger publications, not bloggers for sure, is they advertise these big, huge deals as much as they possibly can, right? As if, and to your point, where Manfred, spoke about how much money they spent, prior to locking the players out. They want to tout, those big signings, but what they're not doing is they're not talking big picture. They're not talking the full picture. They're just talking about the top 1%, and which they are a part of as well, the top 1% of society in terms of their net worth. And so it's just, I guess that's the way they're used to referencing things. But at the end of the day, it skews it completely. And a lot of people don't understand the background and don't understand what you just said, which is, most of the other players are getting screwed. Like a lot, a very high percentage of the other players are the ones whose average salaries are going down every year. And in an environment where team values are going up, this is a business. All right. This is not, this is not just buying a house. This is a business. They're in the business of having an asset that appreciates in value, of generating revenue as much as they possibly can. And how they go about doing it, there aren't really all that many rules because they have antitrust protection. And so it's a really wicked kind of game that they play. And it kind of gets me to my next point, which is the owners, they're continuing to kind of beat the same drum that they've always beat. This whole philosophy of kind of, the average owner is over 70 years old. The average Major League Baseball player is 28 years old. That's a big difference. And it feels like grandpa is getting schooled by the grandkid, because now owners are doing the same thing they've always done, which is use the press. And not to insult anybody, because I'm old too, but the old guys are still kind of, that's how they get their information. But the younger generation, which is MLB is trying to appeal to, they get their information from social media, from Twitter, from other sources on the internet, not through places like ESPN or Fox Sports or these big media places that the owners try to appeal to. And so the owners message the same way they've always been messaging, and they're getting schooled. They're kind of looking dumb, where Hap was saying that they met in November and there was no economic offer proposed at these meetings, where the owners are saying that, we're being forced into a lockout, and they're scrubbing the players from the MLB website and just doing stupid things just to be spiteful. It's like, it's never been more transparent than it is now at how petty the owners are, because I think they're underestimating how smart the younger generation is.
They are, and the thing is though too, the owners have always gotten away with this. They've always and they still, to a large extent, they will. I mean, there's a comment, and I just shared it on my Twitter feed. If you go out like somebody, which is, it's always funny to me, and I do need to remind myself sometimes, like, I don't expect, and that's part of the reason I repeat myself, whether it be here or in some of the things I write, because I don't expect people to read everything I write. That would be kind of silly. But at the same time, if you're coming on to the website that I co-own and edit and largely contribute to quite a bit, and trying to explain to me the business of baseball, like, I'm going to clap back at you for something like that. So somebody's like, I take it you've never been an owner, which is funny. And I think they were referring to a business in general, which part of me wanted to be like, fuck you think you're doing? Like, what do you think this website is? But, because I had said at no point do we need to worry about an owner getting back the value for their investment in a player contract. Like, that's not the way this works, right? But they were like, I take it you've never been an owner. Well, you're right. I have never owned a Major League Baseball team. That is correct. But they're like, I think you need to look at the business of baseball. Like, what? Like, what do you think? What do you think we've been doing here? Like, I'm not the world's foremost expert, but I'm willing to bet that I know as much about the business side of this as more so than maybe your average person. I just found that funny.
There's no doubt about that.
Like, you're going to come on here and mansplain to me, like, tell me come on, man. And that's where every once in a while, like, I want, and it's always, every time this happens, then somebody else will come out of the woodwork. Like, if I'm not trying to be like, do you know who I am? But I'm kind of like, dude, like, read the room, man. And then somebody will be like, oh, what do you mean? Do you mean, you're saying you're better than, like, well, in this case, for this person, yes. But
yeah. To be honest.
Yeah. But I guess the point is that if you go on, particularly on Facebook, right, or in some of our comments, you will find plenty of people who very readily take the side of owners in this. Very much, like, again.
Yeah, but I still think those are the old school guys,
They are, but that's, but I guess that's back to the point, is like, that's who ownership is going to appeal to, because you know what? Those are the people who will come up to Tom Ricketts at Cubs games and want to take pictures with him and all that stuff, right? Though that's the thing, but it's like, it's just, it never ceases to amaze me how people feel like they are personally affronted and offended by Jason Hayward not playing well and not living up to his contract. Like, it's not your money.
Like, that impacts him in some way, shape, or form.
Like, they think, if they pay Carlos Correa, my ticket price are going to go up. Oh, really? Do you think? Okay, that's like saying my grocery prices are probably going to go down if they put in automatic checkout lanes and there's fewer actual clerks to work there. Do you honestly think the grocery store is going to lower your prices because they got fewer people working the registers? Hell no. Do you think Tom Ricketts is going to lower your prices if he doesn't go sign Carlos Correa? Come on, man. That's not happening. There's not a direct. They're going to charge you what they know they can get away with, right?
Which right now is the most in Major League Baseball.
Yeah. And they sure as shit haven't put the best product in Major League Baseball out there over the last few years.
Oh, they did for 1 year.
For 1 year they did. The second half of 2015, they put out a really, in 2015 in general, was a really fun year. So we could even say 2 years. Let's carry that over. And then even in
2017 wasn't bad.
It was residual, and they did make the NLCS, so we'll give them that 3-year period. But outside of that, it's not as if they're like, oh, shit, guys. Boy, we're really sorry. We didn't do that well. We're going to refund everybody who bought a ticket from our website. We're going to refund you 10% of the cost that you spent. Season ticket holders,
You should be mad at Tom Ricketts, because what Tom Ricketts allowed to happen was he took a World Series team, a championship team, and basically flushed it down the toilet by not making a few moves he could have made every year that would have put that team right back in the World Series again. And that window is gone. Yep. And those players are gone, and that is over, and that is completely 100% on Tom Ricketts.
Yes. Well, let's say an owner operated a team at a $25 million loss, a personal loss of $25 million a year. Okay, it would take 4 years for him to lose $100 million. 4 years is what that would take. So it would take 40 years to lose $1 billion. Just 40 years continually operating at a loss. So let's assume all they're doing is breaking even. Well, then guess what? If he's only breaking even, and I say he because there's really no women owners out there. Laura Ricketts is a part owner. I suppose we'll give her that credit there. But let's say the Cubs or any team just breaks even every year. Well, when it appreciates, when an asset of $3 billion appreciates by 5%, that is tremendous. And then when they cash out and sell it for something they bought for $800 million that they could cash out for $4 billion at some point, $5 billion, $6 billion a couple years down the road, that's the point. They aren't looking at how much did I make or lose in a given year. That's we've said if I look at my 401k over the course of 6 months or a year or a month or whatever, and I say, oh no, I don't lose money in that unless I cash that all out. The overall value over time, when I look at it over 5 or 10 or 20 years, that's what's important. Tom Ricketts does not give a shit whether the Cubs make or lose money. Now, he may because his liquidity is not very good, but most owners, let's say, shouldn't care, don't care, or at least Tom Ricketts has literally said, I've heard him say that it's not about making money or losing money year in, year out. It's the valuations. Just like
because if you're making money, you're getting taxed on that money.
Right.
If you own an asset that increases tremendously in value, you don't get taxed on that until you sell the team. And so that's all that matters. If you're a billionaire and they just sold TD Ameritrade, their family just sold TD Ameritrade, and they for what, 600
but it was
billion,
only stock, John. It wasn't real money. It was only stock.
Yeah. And there's no market for stock
that they can cash out. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, what can you do with stock? Okay.
They've got money in the bank. They can support themselves for eternity and probably several lifetimes over and over again. They don't need the Cubs to make them money and to generate revenue on an annual basis.
You got to do something to pay for those 3 cable subscriptions he's got. So
yeah, well, and that's the thing is that like I just kind of wonder like what things would really be like if the Ricketts family didn't go and buy out all of Wrigleyville and dump their money into redeveloping the ballpark and doing all this stuff. I mean, the redevelopment of Wrigley needed to happen. It had to happen, or they were going. The place was going to be shut down because it was a death trap. But at the end of the day, I just wonder, like, they've got all this debt that they're servicing on the outside for building the hotel and for, doing all the development they've done around buying up the rooftops and everything like that. So that does offset any revenue, obviously. So, but if they didn't have that kind of offset that they could use for tax purposes, then I wonder, like, how crappy would the team be? I mean, it's like, would it be crappy? Would it be better because they would just go and spend money and it wouldn't matter, and they'd need to spend money to offset the revenues so they wouldn't have to pay as many taxes? I don't know. It's hard to say, but it's a little twisted, this whole affair that we're in the middle of. And I do feel like kind of we are right in the middle of it. It doesn't feel like, obviously the beginning was when Ricketts bought the team. When did he buy the team? Back in 2005? No, 9.
9. It was 9.
It's all.
There's been like 3 things today where I couldn't even remember. Like I had surgery early this year. I couldn't remember what month that even happened. I was like, I think maybe April, and I had to like look because I was at the doctor today. But this whole COVID thing, man, I tell you what, that my sense of time is jacked from that. But anyway, yeah, I was back at whatever point it was. But at the time Theo came in, that's what I referenced earlier, because we go 10 years back, or 10 years up until the start of this next season, $867 million they were valued at, and different valuations. I don't even know if the Forbes valuation takes into account what the ownership has around the ballpark. I think that may.
I don't think it does.
The club and the ballpark itself and stuff like that. And so, and here's the other thing, right? None of those ancillary revenues go into what eventually has to go into rev share. for Major League Baseball, right? So
exactly, yeah.
what they own around there, what they make money off of outside of immediate Cub and as we've discussed many times, and as you just mentioned in there about you don't want to turn a profit. Like you don't want to get taxed on that stuff annually. You don't think they got some serious accountants out there that are making damn sure that as little as possible is actually attributed to what the Cubs generate in money versus those ancillary businesses? Because as Tom Ricketts, who talked about a dead weight loss and who talked about, having to pay into luxury tax, things like that, you think he wants to split those profits that he's making, that revenue that he's making off those other businesses? You think he wants to split that with 29 other owners? Hell no. So there's a lot of stuff that goes in. So it's there's a lot of stuff.
Ricketts did say, in fact, we've got Tom Vinsel who's asking about money going back into the team, and we were told directly at Cubs convention by God, who's the president? Crane Kenny and Tom Ricketts at separate times, that the money that they generated from outside the ballpark would go back into operations, and that has not happened. In fact, I don't think they're making any money off that right now because, as I mentioned, they have all the debt, and with COVID and everything, it really took a shit all over everything. But
you could, from a legal sense, they could easily say, yeah, any additional, any profits, any whatever will go back in. But then if you sit there and have your bean counters finagle that in such a way that there is no extra money to be put into it, or
exactly.
There's
I think there are losses. There are losses that are going back into the Cubs.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is it's not being subsidized, right? If Marquee is not turning a profit, then they can't put that extra money in. And they did try to, say, well, it'll take a few years, but no, that's the thing, is that, but we don't know that, and we'll never know that unless something changes drastically or the Cubs are sold to a public entity. And so they could say, hey, we made, this is how much we made. And they could tell us that, but we have to rely upon their word as being the complete transparent truth, which is never going to be. And I, that's an area where I don't want to slam them for that. I understand. I don't expect Tom Ricketts to be like, here's my tax return, right? Let me turn you over the records I gave to my accountant to fill this stuff all out, or accountants, right? It's not like he's got one dude. He's not walking into the H&R Block pop-up shop in the strip mall and be like, here you go, John. But clearly there's some creative stuff going on there, right? And I think we understood that. But I think there's also a point at which I don't think, and I'll try not to belabor this too much longer, because my daughter's going to end up at the bus stop at some point here and wondering where the hell I am. But I think these owners, right? They say this stuff and they expect you to just take them at their word. And I truly believe, I really think all these guys are used to believing they're the smartest men in the room, and not understanding, hey, at some point your bullshit's going to run out, because people are going to stop believing you, and you're going to be the emperor, standing out there naked and thinking everybody loves how your new clothes look. And I think they're getting this point. And I think that happened with the Cubs, to where Ricketts is like, whoa, look at our high payrolls. Look at our high payrolls. Look at these. It's like, yeah, dude, but that money got spent 5 years ago. It's just all stuck on the books because you haven't spent anything new. And now you've traded these guys away. So if you want to keep pointing to a high payroll when it's literally half or less right now than what it used to be, you have to go spend money, because otherwise you're going to run out of excuses. And then what's going to happen? Right now, you're going to have to admit that you don't have any money, or you're going to have to spend it, one or the other. But if you're carrying a $75 million payroll, that's a big red flag, buddy. And so but that's where it comes into that spending. So that's where I, am kind of optimistic about them having to spend more, because if they don't, it looks really, really bad. And you run out of the opportunity to they've been able to hide behind a bit of a lie or, creative language the last few years, despite not actually spending any new money, and they can't do that anymore. So that actually makes me optimistic for what they're going to do once this thing opens back up. So that's pretty cool.
What is totally off topic? I'm looking at Twitter and what is going on? People are saying Anthony Rizzo's account is hacked. It's all this kind of
because
crypto.
his whole account for like the last 2 days has been these NFTs. Like his avatar got switched to that, and like every single post of his was retweeting an NFT. I hope it got hacked because otherwise, like, dude, that
he got whacked.
just looked really weird. Yeah, because he kept changing it and like, oh, look at these cool NFTs that I'm part of. I'm like, all right, dude, this is getting a little funny. So
yeah, you think they'd be able, if it was hacked, you'd think they'd be able to pretty much fix that right away.
I would imagine so.
So
maybe somebody was like, hey, dude, you might want to chill. And then it's like, yeah, my account was hacked. Hold on,
I mean, I'm not doing anything. It's a lockout, so I'm just trying to make some money some other ways. Anyways, we do have a guest, Max Bain, coming on Monday. Well, we're doing that later in the day, right?
Yeah, because he's out there in Arizona, got some work to do throughout the day, and I think with the schedules, we're just going to do that. I think it's in the evening. Isn't it like 8:00 or something like that? Eastern time, 7 or 8, like 7 Central, 8 Eastern, something later. I don't remember.
Sounds about right. I think that's what we agreed to. I don't know.
We'll figure it out.
I think I put it on my calendar, but we will be doing it, and it will be Monday, and it will be a little later in the day. So check that out. Should be a fun show, and then we'll continue to try to do these shows where we get earlier in the week, try to get a guest on one show, and then later in the week we'll just come on and do our thing and complain about Tom Ricketts and all the bad things owners do. So.
That's what you do in a lockout, right? Like that's the trouble. Like there's nothing else going on.
It's their fault.
Right. The owners have locked people out. We got nothing else to do. So we'll just yell about the owner. This is what somebody's like, well, this drags out the players. I'm like, no. The owners locked them out. This is not a strike. Right. And it happened a minute after midnight. They knew what the hell was going on. So anyway,
yeah.
I'll stop now.
Players profiles scrubbed.
Yeah.
It's
despite the fact that they're still selling jerseys.
Grandpa.
They're still selling jerseys. You can go into the Cubs shop right now and buy a Marcus Stroman jersey. So don't give me this bullshit about it. We couldn't likenesses, and they won't do it online. But you can go in there, and I know for a fact that Marcus Stroman did not get signed enough. They didn't know enough in advance. They had those jerseys stocked. So they're making money off of Marcus Stroman right now, despite the fact that they're not having any talks with the players. So
good old
right
Gramps.
there. Anyway.
Grandpa, this is Twitter. This is called social media, Gramps.
Yeah.
Anyways, I love grandpas. I do. I love grandpas,
but
it's just like, it's they're typically kind of a little bit out of touch with like the technology and like the reality of things sometimes. Yeah. And I'm almost grandpa age, but I'm not over 70 yet.
So you mean this phone's good for stuff other than making calls and playing Pinochle online? Oh. What about that?
It's fancy Twitter thing you're using. Okay. Anyways, we're digressing. Have fun. Have a good weekend, everybody. I hope whatever team you're rooting for plays and wins.
Sounds good. I hope they all win. No losers this weekend.
None.
See ya.
Bye.